Okay, the second video I'm going to make here is going to look at planning and preparation. And again, we're going to complete all of this section, right? All of this section right here: name, age of the students, grade level, if you have any, number of students with IEPs and so forth, and you need to have a name, a title for your lesson plan. And then you're going to take this part, the content knowledge, you're going to take the content knowledge, and this section number one is the majority of it is going to come from, right, your Kentucky Academic Standards, right? What's the description of the content you're teaching? What essential questions do you have for the lesson? What knowledge and skill is identified? And what's the specific standard or standards you're teaching? You do not need a unit standard, but I would like you to include an ISTE student standard here. You don't need a unit one, but I would like for you to include an ISTE standard for students. And then what are your learning targets? Just like I have at the top of our agenda each week, what are the learning targets that you have for yours? Students will be able to do X, students will be able to do Y, students will be able to do, and so forth, right? And then in this next section, this section right here, too, you're going to talk about what the student's current level of skill is for each of the technologies that you're using. So if you're using Google Classroom, you're going to say in here, see, this is what it says: identify your students' abilities regarding what you just talked about above. Okay, because we're talking about technology in here, the only thing I want you to talk about is what are your student skills currently regarding the technology that you're using. So if you're using Google Classroom, you may say, we've been using Google Classroom. We're going to use Google Classroom in the lesson. Students have been using Google Classroom all year. They're very familiar with how to use it. But maybe you're using Plickers, and you say, I will also use Plickers at the end of the lesson to assess the students. We have not used that technology in the past. Therefore, I will spend 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning of class going over how to use this technology. Learning targets. I just said you're going to identify learning targets in the section above. Okay, here you're going to list those learning targets, right? So learning target 1. And then next, you're going to say, put in there, what is that learning target? And then you're going to say, how am I assessing that target, right? How am I going to know that students met that learning target? And so you might put in here, you might put in this first column over here, you may put Google Forms, right? Or Plickers, or whatever other tool you're using, Nearpod, Pear Deck. Okay, and then you're going to answer, remember Bloom's taxonomy is at the top of Moodle. You can tell what level of Bloom's that is, what standard is being met. I'm not worried about you addressing the accommodations. You really haven't done this yet. If you want to do this, if you've already done it, you can, but we haven't, we haven't gotten into accommodations. The next section is resources, right? So for this one, you're just going to list any resources you're using. So maybe you're teaching a math lesson and you're handing out graph paper, or maybe you're going to have them make a plant cell using clay. So a resource is you're going to give them clay. And then obviously you put the technologies that you're going to use, and all of the technologies that you list here should have already been discussed at some point above, right? Whether that was in the enduring skills section, or the classroom management section, or the learning theory section, somewhere there should be no surprises here. I shouldn't get to the technology list and see a technology that hasn't been discussed previously. And then the final section, and as you remember, I talked about this in class, this final section, the lesson procedures, this is typically the only section you're going to do on a day-to-day basis as a teacher. But you should have some lesson plan procedure that you've created every day so that you know what you're going to teach. You can go back, you can have it in a folder on your computer, you can go back and look at it the next year, and you can tweak it. But also, it should be to the level of specificity, and you should also have it so that if you're you get sick, something happens, you can't come in, that you have this lesson plan that the substitute can pick up and teach to your class. And so you should address, in your lesson that you develop each day, you should address each one of these bullets, right? Now, for this lesson, I'm not going to hold you accountable for these two that have been marked out: pedagogical content knowledge and developmentally appropriate strategies. We've actually talked about pedagogical content knowledge. It was in your reading on TPACK. That's the PCK of TPACK. But I'm not going to assess you on this. And again, this is, in your reading, it talked about Schulman said that you should align the way that you're teaching with what you're teaching. The example I gave of this was using manipulatives to teach math, right? You probably remember getting Fruit Loops. I think Lauren said that she used gummies, when you were learning how to add and subtract. I'm not going to hold you accountable to that, but you should have all of these other ones in there. So learning expectations are when you go over with students, what the learning targets for today. You see down here, I've got at 8:10, I will review the learning targets with students, and I'll have the bulleted learning targets underneath that, right? Because the sub might not know what they are. So I need to have, like I said, this should be specific enough that someone could walk in, and teach this. Differentiated activities, okay? If you're using group work, that's a differentiated activity, right? Because what you would hopefully do is you would pick students and you would assign them to groups based on ability, right? So you may take a student who is going to struggle with the concepts being taught in this lesson and pair them with a student who is sort of going to function as that more knowledgeable other and be able to help them with that. That's just one example. Formative assessment. You should have some formative assessment at the end of this lesson where you're determining whether or not your learning targets were met, or at some point in the lesson. That's where you would put, and remember what you're going to put is just put 3C after when you differentiate instructions, and you may have multiple ones after something. Classroom questioning. This is something we haven't gone over, but it should be fairly self-explanatory. If I'm teaching a lesson on figurative language, I may start the lesson by saying, who can tell me what figurative language is? And somebody defines figurative language, and then I may next ask them, can somebody give me an example of figurative language? Or better yet, I may use technology, right, so that everybody could give me an answer. This is an example of that. And then finally, the collaborative independent learning. If students come in and they start by doing a bell ringer, that's independent learning, right? That's where they're working on that because you're going to go over that bell ringer. And then you should have some collaborative activity. Okay, so hopefully this will help. And I'm going to post both of these online and share the links with you.